Hello, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to begin a new series on the basics of Buddhism. We're going to start by talking about the Buddha himself, his life and times. Let's first set the stage. India was first populated around 60,000 years ago during the early breakout of humans from Africa. DNA studies show that there was also an influx of migrants from the Mesopotamian area much later, around 6,000 to 4,000 before the Common Era, or BCE. The intermixture of these two peoples, the original inhabitants from Africa and the much more recent sojourners from Mesopotamia, was the basis for what is now known to us as the Indus Valley Civilization, which rose beginning around 3600 BCE. At its peak around 2600 BCE, its total population is estimated to have been around 1 to 5 million. Climate change was at least one cause of the fall of the Indus Valley Civilization starting around 2200 BCE. There was drought in the region, indeed throughout much of the world, with a major river, the legendary Saraswati, drying up for most of the year along most of its course. By 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization had fallen into decay, and soon there were only scattered inhabitants among the ruins. In order to understand what happened between the fall of the Indus Valley Civilization and the birth of the Buddha around the year 563 BCE, we need to go to the region of modern-day Ukraine and back in time to the early Bronze Age, perhaps 3300 BCE. At that time, a people lived along the northern coast of the Black Sea, whom archaeologists today call the Yamnaya, a name taken from the Russian word yama, which means related to pits, that is, holes dug into the ground. The Yamnaya buried their dead in pits, as seen in these images. The burial pits were covered in kurgans, huge mounds piled up to protect the respected dead and their afterlife treasures, and to serve as meeting places to honor the dead. The Yamnaya were among the first to tame horses, and all domesticated horses today descend from those the Yamnaya tamed. Horses were originally small, but were bred such that they became larger and more useful as centuries went on. The Yamnaya also had cattle and oxen, which, combined with wheeled wagons, provided them mobility. They moved to follow the seasons, carrying the goods in their wagons and herding cattle, oxen, and horses. The Yamnaya spoke a language which was a precursor, theoretically named Proto-Indo-European, of the Indo-European language group, which includes languages spoken by over 40% of the world's population today. The Yamnaya began to migrate northwest, invading the corded ware culture around 3000 BCE. There is no other way to describe it besides as an invasion, although it might have happened over decades or even centuries. This migration, the DNA shows, was made up of almost exclusively males. Some of these people, now a mixed people, Yamnaya and corded ware, moved east slowly over generations, dominating and yet assimilating with the conquered peoples. As they mastered the horse and the wheel, they became ever more mobile. They moved out into the Great Steppe, which runs from Hungary through Ukraine and all the way east to Manchuria, nearly 6,000 miles. As they spread east and then south, they spread their language, their technology, their culture, and their genes all along the steppe and to the north and south. The Sanskrit, who first developed the light spoked wheel war chariot, lived a pastoral life but protected themselves against other steppe nomads by living in protected stockades, as seen here. But apparently the Sanskrit found that they had to give up a settled life. They were too vulnerable in their fixed locations. So they set out, moving from place to place again as their ancestors had done, until around 2000 BCE some of them came to the area northeast of the Caspian Sea. These Sanskrit descendants are now known to scientists as the Andronovo. The Andronovo moved south into the area of the Oxus River, north of modern-day Iran, around 2000 BCE. This area was home to what is now known as the Oxus River Civilization, or the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, also known as the BMAC, the BMAC. The BMAC had to some extent grown up because of the influx of trade from the Andronovo and other peoples, including very likely the Indus Valley civilization. But as their numbers grew more numerous, the Andronovo seemed to have overwhelmed and caused the fall of the Oxus River civilization. The descendants of the Andronovo warriors moved down into Iran starting around 1800 BCE. During this time, Old Avestan, the language of the Avesta scripture of Zoroastrianism, was the language of these horse warriors. From Iran, they split off in two main directions. One branch went off toward the west, toward the Mediterranean, to spread their language and culture to the Middle East and beyond. The other branch of these Iranians went south and came to India. This movement of the steppe warriors into India is often called the Aryan invasion, and understandably this arouses resentment in India. But all peoples throughout history, certainly all ancient peoples, have at one time or another been invaded. There is no shame in having been invaded. This was the way of the world up until recently. It needs to be acknowledged that much of the religion and culture of modern India is descended from those so-called Aryans, including Sanskrit, which descends from Old Avestan. So what is an Aryan? The word Aryan and its antecedents meant of the royal family and or the royal language among the steppe peoples. It came to mean noble in later Sanskrit usage. Later yet, Nazis ruined the word by adopting it as part of their horrible theories about race, but in Buddhism and Hinduism it still means noble. The name of the region and modern nation, Iran, is actually just another form of the word Aryan. The word Iran comes from Aryanum in Old Persian, meaning land of the Aryans. Each large grouping of these steppe peoples was led by one strong leader, one of the royal family, an Aryan, who might, if there were too many young men for the area, send a group off to conquer more territory under the leadership of some lieutenant, perhaps a son or cousin, thus also of the royal clan, an Aryan, who would still report back and pay tribute to his kinsman and overlord. Eventually, perhaps, this new leader would send out his own lieutenants, and the domains of the Aryans would thus continue to expand across the steppe. The DNA evidence shows that almost invariably they came as conquerors, dominating the local populace, becoming creolized with the people but enforcing their own language and other elements of their culture. This occurred in northwestern India over the course of most likely many decades or even centuries, once the Indus Valley civilization had fallen after 1900 BCE. The time period for the earliest of the Hindu Vedas, or holy texts, the Rig Veda, is around 1500 to 1200 BC. This and later Vedas therefore give us a good idea what life was like in the years after the coming of the Aryans. The time period from 1500 BCE to the age of the Buddha in the 6th century BCE in India is called the Vedic Age. It was the Late Bronze Age. Bronze weapons were used in warfare, as were horses and spoke-wheeled chariots, first brought to India by the Aryans. Clans and tribes were the political structures during the earlier centuries. Only later, toward the Buddha's time, did larger tribal groups and then cities emerge. As this happened, society became more stratified. The Aryans held the places at the top of the structure, reinforced by and influencing the developing religion and caste system. By the time of the Buddha, large armies were fielded by the various political entities. Armies consisted of infantry, chariots, and elephants. Village life was common for the majority in northern India. Looking at the rest of the world at the time of the Buddha's birth in circa 563 BCE, we see that Europe is indistinct, with no nations or city-states. Rome is still ruled by a king, not yet a republic, let alone an empire. Athens was under rule of a tyrant with no democracy yet. Egypt was enjoying a few brief generations of independence and Egyptian rule. Far to the east, China was in its spring and summer period, a time of political fragmentation. Confucius, the great thinker, would be born when the Buddha-to-be was an adolescent. And to the east of India at this time, the lands from Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey, to the edges of India were loosely ruled by the king of the Medes, Astyages. Astyagi's grandson would soon defeat him in battle and go on to found the greatest empire yet known, the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire. He is remembered today as Cyrus the Great. His empire would come nearly to the borders of India by the time he died in approximately 530 BCE. The Persian Empire would last for nearly 200 years more. In India itself, it was the age of the 16 Mahajanapadas, or great people bases, that is, nations or homelands. Kosala was one of the major players and bordered the Buddha's lands, that of the Shakyas, the Aryan clan into which the Buddha would be born. At the time of the Buddha's birth, so it is written, a number of seers, Brahmins, scholars, and astrologers prophesied that the young prince would become either a Sakravartin, a wheel-rolling king, a great king, or a great spiritual leader. One of these who prophesied, Kondanya, would later become one of the Buddha's spiritual companions, one of his first 5 disciples, and the first one to attain enlightenment under his teaching. His father, Suddhodana, was one of several clan-based oligarchs among the Shakya people. It is said that the Buddha's mother, Mahamaya, gave birth to the future Buddha while standing up holding onto a tree. It is also said that the child was born from his mother's side, possibly an allusion to a caesarean birth, a theory further suggested by the fact that she died within a week, theoretically from birth complications. This caesarean birth story is merely speculation. There are representations of the Buddha walking immediately after his birth. Obviously, there is some embellishment going on here. The young child was named Siddhartha, he who achieves his goal. As he was one of the Gautama clan of the larger Shakya clan or people, he was named Siddhartha Gautama. The name Gautama means richest in cows, a name descended no doubt from his Aryan herder ancestors, for whom cows were the basis of wealth. Having been actually born in Lumbini, Siddhartha grew up in the capital city of the Shakyas, Kapilavastu, not too many miles away. Suddhodana, having heard the prophecies about his son's birth, chose to shield him from the realities of the world, hoping in this way to keep him from seeking to leave the world and seek enlightenment. He wanted his son to be a wheel-rolling king, not to leave his father without an heir. The Buddha later spoke of his father building 3 palaces for him, one for each season, winter, summer, and the rainy season. He grew up spoiled with every possible luxury. Siddhartha eventually married a young princess named Yasodhara, who soon became pregnant. Now at this time, around the age of 29, so it is said, there occurred an incident which is referred to as the 4 sights. One day Siddhartha suddenly insisted that his chariot driver take him out for a ride immediately. Before now, arrangements had always been made ahead of time when the young prince was to go out, but Siddhartha would not wait, and so for the first time at age 29, the future Buddha saw the realities of life. He saw an old person and inquired of his friend and charioteer, who explained that we all grow old, our bodies fall into ruin as the years go by. He saw sickness. He saw a funeral procession and a dead man. This was his first encounter with death. The charioteer reluctantly explained that all men die and their bodies decay and disintegrate. Finally, he saw a wandering sadhu or holy man. Siddhartha was deeply impressed by the sadhu's seeming serenity. He was calm and centered, yet energetic and aware. The young prince returned to the palace deep in thought. He believed that we are all reborn again and again, endlessly, stumbling from one life to the next with little choice over the circumstances. It wasn't pleasant for most of the people. Only the few were shielded by luxury and only because of the sword, and all of them would die one day. The law of karma would dictate that if he spent his life in luxury, if he unleashed armies upon the land, becoming a wheel-rolling king, he would suffer for many, many lives. Heavens and hells were very real to his people, and he would actually later confirm that these things do exist. And now his wife, Yasodhara, went into labor. He felt trapped. His child was born, Rahula, but within a short time Siddhartha would leave home. The more common later story was that the Buddha to be left home in the middle of the night without anyone but his tearful charioteer knowing that he was leaving. But according to the older teaching, the Buddha himself said that his mother and father wished otherwise about his leaving home for the life of a renunciant, and that they wept with tearful faces, which would seem to indicate that he told them before leaving. In referring to his mother, who, as you may recall, had died shortly after giving birth to Siddhartha, he was talking about his aunt, Prajapati, his mother's sister, who had married Siddhartha's widowed father Surodhana and became the only mother that Siddhartha ever knew. In any event, he left home and entered the homeless life. Giving up his fine clothes in return for a used robe, he shaved his head and took up the begging bowl. For now, he was just like any of the dozens or hundreds of wandering monks, going into town each morning for alms, then eating before spending the rest of the day and into the night learning and meditating. It must be mentioned, the main beliefs of what would later be called Hinduism were already in place in northern India. As we'll see, Siddhartha learned much from Hindu teachers as he began his spiritual quest. There was a general spirituality among the people. There were wandering ascetics everywhere, mostly male but some female. The people were respectful of them, supporting them by providing alms, food, clothing, and medicine. Thus, almost total spiritual freedom was available, a key ingredient to spiritual life. Soon Siddhartha came across a teacher named Alara Kalama, who brought him to the base of nothingness, the seventh of 8 jhanas or levels of meditation. Realizing that this was not the answer, he continued searching, finding another teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, who showed him the base of neither consciousness nor unconsciousness, the 8th jhana. We will discuss these levels of meditation and much more later on in the series. For now, let it suffice to say that he came to find that even the 8th level of concentration was not an escape from the suffering of the world. It was not the answer. And so he continued wandering. In time, he came upon a group of 5 renunciants. One of these, Kondanya, whom we mentioned earlier, was one of the sages or Brahmins who had prophesied about Siddhartha before his birth. Siddhartha now began, with these followers, 6 years of extreme austerities. He thought, as many did, that you could achieve enlightenment by burning away one's karma through painful austerities. There were some among these wandering sadhus who would, for example, give up bathing as a sacrifice. Others would not cut their hair or nails for years, to the point where their fingernails would curve around and grow through their hands. All of them lived outdoors all of the time. Some would only wear discarded rags for clothing. Others would go naked. Some would eat only certain things, for instance, loose grain from the fields or cow dung. There is no record of the Buddha to be doing any of these particularly extreme practices, but he would meditate out in the middle of the jungle at night, in the rain or cold. He ate less and less until he was eating only a single grain of rice each day. He described being able to touch his spine from the front, through his stomach, so emaciated was he. The depictions of fat Buddha are pure fiction. Finally, one day he realized, austerities have not brought me freedom. They have not brought me to an answer to the world's suffering. Is there another way to enlightenment? And then he remembered, one day when he was a child, a festival was going on, and in his father's garden under a rose apple tree he had fallen into a trance, into the first jhana, the first of the 8 levels of meditation. And remembering, he perceived that this, perhaps, was the way to enlightenment. Realizing that he needed strength, he was on death's doorstep from malnutrition. He was blessed to see a young girl who brought him a bowl of rice and butter. Having regained his strength, he sat down beneath a tree, the Bodhi tree, determined not to rise until he had achieved enlightenment. Immediately Mara, the devil, attacked, sending his sons to frighten the Bodhisattva. When this didn't work, he sent his daughters to tempt him, but to no avail. The Bodhisattva rejected Mara's illusion and entered into meditation. He entered the first jhana, then the second, the third, and the fourth. From there, still in the world of form but perfectly concentrated, with the internal dialogue stopped, tranquil, in the first watch of the night he directed his mind to the recollection of his past lives. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. In the second watch, with his divine eye, he saw how beings pass on and reappear, moving on from life to life according to their actions, their karma. And in the final watch of the night, his mind was liberated through destruction of the deadly floods, the deadly taints, and he attained nirvana, cessation, peace. The earth shook, and Mara the devil quailed. The awakened one spent several weeks under the tree then, walking about and contemplating. He considered, "This Dharma that I have attained is profound, difficult to see and difficult to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in worldliness, takes delight in it, rejoices in it. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. If I were to teach the Dharma, others would not understand me." Considering this, his mind was inclined to inaction rather than to teaching the Dharma. Then it is written, Brahma, that is to say God, pleaded with the awakened one, saying, "There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting away through not hearing the Dharma. There will be those who will understand the Dharma." And so the enlightened one concurred, and took on the mantle of Buddhahood. He taught from that day on for roughly 44 years, being about 36 at the time. The Buddha consciously passed from this life by way of the fourth jhana, entering into final nirvana. But he lives on through his teaching, his Dharma, and we will explore it as we proceed. I hope you'll join me. In our next lesson, we'll look at the first Buddhist council, which was held 90 days after the Buddha's passing, when the Buddhist Dharma, as well as the rules for monks and nuns, were set down and codified. We'll look at the Tripitaka, the three baskets of the Dharma, and review the divisions of the Sutta Pitaka, the teachings of the Buddha. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more, please like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments. See you next time.